Is that a threat or is that a promise? Ho-ho, is that a threat or is that a promise? Now, I doubt you can probably remember the first time you heard that, but maybe you remember the first time you used it, or maybe you remember the last time you used it. It's a very tricky statement to get right, and in the right context, and amongst the right people. Hey, I'll see you later tonight. Is that a threat or a promise? I'd be happy to cook you dinner. Is that a threat or a promise? Now, we can use that phrase in many different contexts. Sometimes we'll get a good hearty laugh. That's normally when we're amongst friends and amongst equals. We can also use it and get anything but a chuckle. When the boss says, "I'll see you this Saturday for work," maybe you shouldn't say, "Is that a threat or a promise?" And kids, when your parent says to you, "If you walk out that door, you're grounded for a month," it may be not the best idea to turn and say, "Oh yeah? Is that a threat or a promise?" Chances are that one's going to be a promise. Well, here we are on the festival of Michael and all angels. And once again, the first thing that pops into my head about angels isn't in one of our readings. Now, I refer to the advice given in the letter to the Hebrews. Sandwiched in between these two bits of advice, "Let brotherly love continue," and "Remember those who are in prison," in between those two bits of advice comes this advice zinger. "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." Now, I can remember hearing that for the first time and thinking, uh-oh. And I realized yesterday that reaction, as I was bouncing a thought off of Callie, I realized that I might sit a bit differently with angels than most of you, because my first reaction to the thought of a stranger being an angel in my presence wasn't, "All right," it was, uh-oh, trouble. And that probably says more about me and how I entertain strangers in my life than it does about angels in their presence. But from there on out, year after year after year, when I thought of that statement, I didn't think, "What a wonderful thing." I thought, "Oh no, this can't be good." And so there is no doubt if somebody said to me, "Bryce, is that statement from Hebrews a threat or a promise?" It was a threat. And I knew that threat well. But you might be happy to hear that I've started reevaluating my reaction to this in light of what we actually hear about angels and about their ministry to humanity. Why it took me this long to reevaluate, I don't know, but here we are. And so let's just think about angels in our Gospels and our lives of Jesus. First, an angel comes to both Mary and to Joseph to give them some startling but some good news. "Mary, you will be with child, and it will be the Son of God. And Joseph, don't worry, all is well. Go through with the marriage." Good news. I mean, maybe not something that we'd like to hear more than once in our lives, but good news nonetheless brought by God's messenger. Then, a whole heavenly host greets the shepherds in the field to announce the good news of Jesus' birth. Then angels come to Jesus after his 40-day grueling sojourn in the desert, and they come to minister to him, to strengthen him. And then if we fast forward, of course, to the end of our Gospels, we find in the empty tomb angels sitting and waiting to give us the best news we have ever heard. He is not here. He has risen. Go tell everyone else. That all sounds really good. And it's all the work of God's messengers, his angels, to us. And so seeing angels in light of those stories will probably make all of us say the presence of an angel isn't a threat from God, but instead the presence of an angel is a promise delivered by God. Now, that isn't to say that the presence of angels isn't a startling thing. I can only assume that it is and has been just that for quite a few people. We hear of Jacob's fear in our reading in the Old Testament. We see Isaiah, fear and trembling seizes him as he's in the presence of angels. And in the New Testament, we hear the common angelic refrain, "Do not fear." In an age of fear and trembling, we don't need one more thing that sends our knees knocking together. And so we have angels, messengers from God to usher in the fearless presence of God in our lives. Do not be afraid. What is also very interesting is that we are even talking about angels still today. In the year 2019, our Western society has banished fairies and sprites and those kind of things into the rubbish heap of our history. And most of us seem okay with that, but it seems as though nobody should put a hand on our angels. We still talk about them, we still think about them, and we haven't allowed them to recede into the recesses of an age gone by. And maybe, just maybe, that is because we need them. 2,000 years ago, God came to us in Jesus of Nazareth and said to the world, "I want to live as one of you, to be with you. I want to suffer with you. And I want to die for you to show you how much I love you." That is the message of the incarnation. The angels of God come to us to say that God still wants to be in our lives, that God still wants to speak to us, to be near us, to defend us, and to care for us. We may not always know when we are in the presence of angels, but when we hear and experience that God is near us, when we feel defended and cared for, well, we might very well be in the presence of God's angels. That is the message of the angels. It's not a threat. It's not something to invoke fear and apprehension. The presence of God through his angels is a divine promise of presence, defense, and care. And if being in the presence of God causes us to tremble just a bit, then the angels want us to know and to hear, do not be afraid. God is with you as a promise of defense and care and presence. And his angels bring that to us. And for that, we give thanks and say amen.